Welcome to the Not Sorry Art podcast. I'm Sari, the artist and creator behind Not Sorry Art. I'm so excited to talk art and creativity with you, so grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's dive in. I also wanted to say that today's episode is sponsored by my book. I have a book coming out. I'm so proud of this, guys. The links are already up. I'll have them in the show notes. But the book is called Modern Still Life, From Fruit Bowls to Disco Balls. It is my take on a step-by-step painting book. I am really excited about it. Not only does it have like motivational tips and tricks to keep you going in your practice, but it also has clear and beautiful and full color breakdowns of the step-by-step process in my paintings. So I could not be more excited about it. If you wanted to check it out, pre-order it. It would help me more than you even know. Hey y'all, welcome back to the Not Sorry Art podcast. I'm Sari. Thanks for being here. I'm so excited for y'all to listen to my two-part series on solvent-free oil painting. Today is part 2, and it's an interview with Gamblin's product expert, Mary Tevlin. In this conversation, Mary and I discuss the intricacies of painting mediums and the myriad ways artists have approached oil painting throughout history. Y'all, this was such a fun episode. Mary kindly shares her product knowledge about solvent and solvent-free options so that artists can be fully informed on their brush cleaning choices and understand what might work best for them. I hope you enjoyed this interview and walk away really empowered in your choices when it comes to painting with oil paints, solvent-free or otherwise. I also share a little bit more on my personal solvent-free journey in this episode and some of my oil painting tricks, tips, and go-tos. If you would like to see a lot of this advice in action, make sure to check out my latest YouTube video on this subject over on my YouTube channel. In this video, I include a full solvent-free demo. I hope you check it out. Thank you always for listening and enjoy the episode. Welcome, Mary. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to have your expertise on the show. If you wouldn't mind starting out telling us a little bit about how you got into this role with Gamblin and your journey and kind of what drew you to wanting to help artists understand their mediums.
Great. Well, thanks, Sari. I am really excited to be here. Personally, I joined Gamblin in 2015, not long after graduating from Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, Oregon. Folks might not know, Gamblin has always been located in Portland since 1980. Having lived in the Portland area for quite a long time and attended school there, I was really excited to find a job that was in my city. Gamblin is actually a pretty small operation of only about 25 people total.
Wow.
The office team is relatively small and really close-knit. People wear a lot of different hats in terms of their roles at Gamblin. And over the years, I've done a multitude of different roles, from customer support to quality assurance testing, research and development of products, and also participating with people like you on podcasts and webinars just to answer questions or have discussions on all sorts of different topics. So really quite a wide range of different roles at Gamblin. But first and foremost, I always consider myself an oil painter. When it boils down to it. Yeah, I've been painting with oils a majority of my life, in all my studies and continuing on since graduating. Oil painting's always been at the forefront of all of my passions. When I'm not working, I'm usually down at my easel working on something or other. And sometimes I teach classes too, but nothing crazy, mainly for close friends and family, if anything. And yeah, that's one of my favorite things actually about working for Gamblin, since really at the heart of the company, Robert Gamblin was an oil painter himself, and something that's really been important to the whole mission of the company is to connect with artists, support their work, providing educational resources or inspiration. And being a painter myself, getting to talk to other artists, all throughout the week. I mean, who could ask for anything more? So I guess that's a quick summary of my role at Gamblin. And all I can say is that they're a really kind, really generous company.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I absolutely love that you're also an artist. It's funny. Whenever someone can kind of speak both, the science and everything that goes into the paint making process, and then also has the real life application and understanding of how colors work, I feel like that makes you like just so robust in your job and as a painter too, I'm sure. Let's say your expertise. So I love that. And that's cool to hear that Gamblin is such a small little tight knit company. I know through y'all's social media presence that I get the vibe that you like follow up with artists and you're kind of as much a fan as a company, which is such a cool spot to be in. So I feel like everything you just said, like, makes sense. It all like was clicking as you were saying things. So again, I just want to say thank you for being here. And yeah, I'm that's a really beautiful story. I'm going to jump in a little bit to kind of where my interest in the medium comes from and kind of my journey over the last, I guess, like 3 years. Because for a little bit of insight, I actually sort of was an acrylic painter first, and it was my first love. And I was actually a little bit stubborn about like really liking acrylic paint. So in college, my professor was an oil painter, but our art studio on campus was an old bottling factory, which is very cool and hipster and brick, but it had the worst ventilation. So we had to do acrylic. It just wasn't an option to do oil. And I fell in love with it. I loved the texture and everything about it. But as I continued painting, I realized that eventually I would like to phase plastics out of my practice as much as humanly possible. So I found myself at this like crossroads. And as much as I love the way oils look and they're buttery, and I didn't think it'd be a huge change, I ended up finding, a little bit of a struggle with like, okay, well, is it safe? How safe do I need to be? Where's a good medium? And so the first big jump for me was finding GalKid, actually. So that helped me, like I was able to mix basically my own heavy body acrylic paint texture. So that was a huge win. And then when I did decide to focus on the safety thing, side tangent about the safety thing, I actually stumbled upon someone's YouTube video, and I think they were doing resin pour or something. But when they bought this stuff from the craft store, there weren't very many safety labels on it. And so this woman did these resin classes, kind of made it her whole job. And for about a year, didn't realize the fumes and the off gas, and absolutely torched her lungs and got in like some pretty serious health complications from it. And I had this sort of awakening about, we really have to be our best consumer advocates for ourselves. And so all that to say, I ended up switching to oils mostly at this point, and also switching to a low tox / partly solvent free painting practice at this point. And it's been a real journey, and people have asked me about it, and I want to make sure I have all of my ducks in a row before I start telling people how to paint and what practices to use. Because when it comes to safety, and I'm sure you know this way more than I do, you just have to be really, really careful, because there are some real risks with solvents, and there are real risks with some of the pigments in the paint. So if that gives you some insight into like where my journey is, I don't know if that's any bit helpful. I guess I would start by kind of asking you, what are the materials traditionally used with oil, and where do some of those safety concerns start to come from?
Yeah, that's a great starting point, because there are very commonly misinterpreted aspects to oil painting. And a lot of it over the years, many decades, if not centuries, has come from concerns not so much about the colors themselves, but what is being used to thin the paint, which historically have been very, very harsh aromatic solvents such as turpentine. The colors themselves, most oil colors are completely solvent free. They don't produce fumes, they don't off gas. And that's because they're just simple mixtures of vegetable oil and high quality pigment, the same high quality pigments that are used in acrylics, watercolors, gouache, or egg tempera. Those are also used in the oil paint industry. And then instead of using like polymer plastic, like acrylics, we use linseed oil, safflower oil. Walnut oil is another example of an oil binder. And because of the way they dry, this is one thing that artists might not be familiar with is the way in which oil paint dries versus how a water-based or an acrylic-based paint does. With oil, there's no evaporation or any type of off-gassing of the paint itself. The paint is oxidizing, which is a process where oxygen is pulled into the paint layer. And that is how the individual molecular chains of an oil paint film link up and dry, is through the intake of oxygen rather than the outputting of any type of material. And the only time when an oil paint film is producing some type of fume or any type of evaporated material is usually when you're incorporating the use of a solvent alongside the oil. And me personally, I really advocate for the solvent-free style of oil painting. Gamblin has a lot of information and has really been vocal for over many decades about the usefulness of eliminating solvents in a studio. So that's something that I'm really excited to talk with you more about, because it is a growing trend amongst artists, the desire for eliminating or reducing the use of solvents so you can just work with the organic, non-toxic materials that the paint itself is made from. Lots of scenarios, like you mentioned, inadequate ventilation, I think, is one of the biggest reasons why one might consider not using solvents, is when you're not able to ventilate your space properly. Other reasons, though, can be health preferences, sensitivity to certain materials, even if you do have the right ventilation. And then finally, you could have, robust ventilation, but just a desire to eliminate petroleum byproducts from the studio. I think that the environmental impact is another very valid and growing reason. And when you paint with just the oil colors or non-toxic mediums, like just plain old linseed oil or one of our solvent-free mediums that we offer, and I would love to talk with you more about in a little bit, the colors themselves are completely non-toxic. In fact, many of the pigments that are often thought of as toxic are indeed low in their toxicity as well. So there is such a wide range available to artists who want to explore oils or continue their oil painting practice without worry of either personal health and safety or environmental impact.
Yeah, I love that. That's so helpful and such a good ground layer of info that we can continue to build on in this episode. I have a hunch, though, you're saying that it seems to be kind of a trend. I think at large, there's a real movement for, environmental safety and personal safety. And maybe this is anecdotal, but I know a lot of people who were, gravitated towards acrylics because of the safety. Their moms, they paint in their house, they paint in their, dining room when the kids are in bed. And, a lot of people, especially parents, will risk a little bit of safety for themselves. But when it comes to their kids, it's a hard no. You don't want to contaminate the air. And so I know a lot of, people who have been on a similar journey as me, who are acrylic painters. And then, because of the plastic, because of the environmental footprint, because of how many steps you have to go to be really responsible with your plastic waste, are like, maybe I should just switch to oil. And I know that has happened. So I think a lot of the environmentally friendly movement plus the personal safety are probably kind of hand in hand. That's at least my working theory of it. But I'm excited to hear, I think one thing people might be curious about is, what are the different solvents? Because when I first started looking into going solvent free, there was the cleaning with oil method, and then there was spike oil, and then Gamsol. I actually used Gamsol before, and I had no irritation with it. I've heard some people say it gives them headache. I had no problem with it. My studio is decently ventilated, but I never, for me, it was an abundance of safety that I wanted to switch away from it. But I'm wondering if you could start by telling us, what is turpentine, terpenoid, spike oil? What are all of those different kinds of ways to clean your brush?
Oh, definitely. Because a lot of the time, for many artists, the time when you're when you can be exposed to the most highest concentration of aromatic solvents is usually during your cleanup, usually during your brush cleaning, or when you're cleaning surfaces, your work area. Maybe you got a really, really productive session in the studio where you use nearly all of your paintbrushes.
Yes.
And when you're physically hovering over the brushes for cleanup, this is often when you can have the highest amount of exposure to an aromatic solvent. To break it down, probably the most harmful types of solvents available are ones that, like turpentine, which artists who use heavy resins, such as damar resin, copal, or mastic resins, these are in the vein of a more old school approach to material use, the use of natural resins such as damar. Those types of materials require the use of a very strong solvent like turpentine in order to dissolve the resin. For example, if you take a damar crystal, which come in little hard crystal lumps, if you were to try to take an undissolved crystal of damar and use Gamsol to try to formulate it, the Gamsol wouldn't be strong enough. The crystal would just get wet and float to the bottom, and it would not dissolve. You would need to have something very strong, such as turpentine or even an isopropanol. These products, as many know, but it always bears repeating, they require extensive ventilation. They are harmful in enclosed spaces. They actually are very harmful for skin contact as well. And in general, we feel that there are so many valid alternatives that one really should take a hard look at the use of strong aromatic solvents such as turpentine and really consider the ventilation in your space and maybe who you're bringing into your space and what you might be exposing yourself and others to. That's one of the first things we should outline, because oftentimes solvents are called terps.
Yeah.
When
it's confusing.
It is. Oftentimes I hear people refer to other types of solvents like Gamsol or terpenoid. I think the name terpenoid, it causes confusion.
Yeah.
And they call them all terps, when really the word turpentine is a very specific, very aromatic solvent that was widely used for an extended period of time before more mild, more refined mineral spirits came to be. And that's where we move forward into the future. You get refined mineral spirits, such as, like you can get at the hardware store for commercial or home interior projects. Those are very readily available, but they still have smell to them. Regular mineral spirits have an aromatic quality, although they're not as toxic as turpentine. Then we get into the territory of completely odorless mineral spirits like Gamsol. Yes, like Gamsol has almost all of the harmful aromatics have been removed. However, with a major disclaimer that it is still a petroleum byproduct. Even though it is odorless, that does not mean you are not smelling it. Even though you're not smelling it, does not mean that you are not breathing it. And even for a very refined, no odor solvent such as Gamsol, ventilation is still required. Ventilation is still needed. And that really can be as simple as opening a window and having a fan going for airflow. Exhaust fans often work really well too, but you do need to have some air exchange even when you're working with low odor or no odor solvents. Moving on to that, there are also other alternatives such as spike lavender oil you asked about, which is a plant extract which has low toxicity as well, Since Gamblin does not produce or sell spike lavender oil ourselves, we hesitate from commenting on it exactly, but I do know that it is a popular choice for artists in that it really does not have the same properties as a solvent does,
Right.
in terms of needing ventilation. And in my personal experience with spike lavender oil, it has a very strong odor to it.
If you're sensitive to it, it's I tried it and I couldn't swing it because it was powerful.
I personally like it. I personally have a fondness for the spike lavender because I love just the essence of it personally, but I have talked to countless others, such as, like you said, where it is a little overwhelming. Although it has low toxicity to it, it is a much more aromatic experience.
Right.
So I always caution people, if they're considering that, to really start with a small bottle. It is a more expensive product too. There are so many alternatives, though, in terms of brush cleaning or thinning oil colors. Some of the complete non-solvent alternatives that we often advocate for is just simply using safflower oil on its own. Works very well as an alternative to solvent for brush cleaning. For example, in place of any type of solvent, be that terpenoid, mineral spirits, Gamsol, or spike lavender, you could get instead a small dish or a cup, fill that with some safflower oil. And my first recommendation would be to just try to get as much paint off of the brush to begin with, with a rag or a paper towel. And then you gently, with your hands, work the safflower oil into the brush, often kneading it or pressing it against the bottom of the bowl. You'll start to see color readily come out, and then you wipe again with your brush. It takes more time compared to using a solvent. You have to repeat the cycle a few more times. And you do generate more dirty rags, which we'll definitely want to touch on maybe in a little bit. The safety concerns with the storage and disposal of oil-soaked rags. But with safflower oil, you can technically clean all your brushes really well without having to open or crack into any type of solvent to begin with. So there are always options. One other fun thing, though, rounding back to the topic of Gamsol as a brush cleaner too, something that safflower oil can't do, that Gamsol or other mineral spirits can do, is they clarify in between uses. And this is a really great benefit for artists who have a lot of brushes and they got to clean a lot of paint out of their materials and their tools. Is after you're done using the Gamsol in the jar itself, the pigments will settle to the bottom over a period of 1 to 2 days, which leaves you perfectly clean, reusable Gamsol that can be recycled within the same jar numerous times. In my own studio, when I do need to use solvent for brush cleaning, I have a system set up with 3 different jars that are in different stages of the settling process. So there's always a new jar to use that has the separated pigment and Gamsol within it. And using these systems, me typically, as a painter who paints on a semi-regular basis, and I know that can vary from person to person, but let's just say several times a week on average. Usually takes me in the ballpark of 2 to 3 years to go through a whole gallon of Gamsol.
Wow.
And that's through repeatedly recycling it multiple times over. So that is, a really great economical way of looking at it when you do use refined odorless mineral spirits such as Gamsol. They can be recycled numerous times before you have to dispose of it at a hazardous waste facility is where you would have to take used Gamsol to. But there's lots of options though with like safflower oil where you can further cut back on your use of solvent.
Yeah, that's all incredibly helpful. And it reminds me of actually the first time I went and got Gamsol because I'd switched from acrylic or was trying to switch from acrylic. And, with acrylic, when you clean your brushes and it's your medium and all that stuff, you go through a lot of water.
The
and
water
so I got
stays dirty.
Oh, so it's a whole mess. Yeah. Well, I got the gallon of Gamsol thinking, I paint a lot. And it took me, I think it was like over a year to go through it because the whole, you let it settle, you do the pouring. And I figured out that whole method. And I was like, oh, you can reuse your water. And it's a lot more immediate than that. So even if it isn't your goal, like oil paint just has sort of built in a little more recycling to it, a little slower. And so that was a funny thing that I learned. I went and got the gallon thinking I would, go through.
Yeah.
And nope, it lasted forever.
And even the pigment itself in the brush cleaning jar too. This is such a fun thing I always mention whenever I get a chance is that the pigment that is in the solvent jar where you have your Gamsol, eventually, you might have a whole lot of pigment down at the bottom there. And many people wonder, what do I do with that? Do I throw it away? Do I take it somewhere? And if you don't want to mess with it at all and you just want it out of your studio, it would need to be taken to, the jar itself would need to be taken to a hazardous waste facility. However, if you have a little bit of time and you don't mind getting a little dirty, what you can do is reclaim, after you've poured the clean Gamsol out of the jar, you can reclaim the pigment at the bottom. And I always call it the color sludge at the bottom.
It does have a sludge vibe to it.
Yeah. And depending on your palette, what colors you use, it's going to be unique to your own personal palette. So like if you use a lot of phthalos, it might have a greenish tinge. If you're a big quinacridone fan or alizarin, maybe it's going to have a reddier, browner, warmer cast. But you can take all of those recycled pigments at the bottom, scoop out the color sludge, and then remixing it with any oil, linseed, safflower, whatever you want. You actually make your own recycled paint, which is really cool. Whenever it takes a while for you to build up enough pigment at the bottom, but I often will do that and I save it in a little jar, and it's my favorite for when I need just like a tonal gray wash on a white canvas or panel to get things started and dive into a nice, tonal underpainting or block.
And it's custom to your palette too. So I love that. I mean, I feel like you could, charge for that. Well, don't you guys have like, I think you recycle paint in your facility and yeah.
Yep. Torrid Gray. And what's really special about Torrid Gray is we don't charge for it. It's always, Torrid Gray. The name Torrid is funny. Many people ask where the name Torrid comes from. It's named after the air filtration system at the Gamblin factory, which is a massive piece of equipment. Donaldson is the company that produces the Torrid air filter. And Donaldson Torrid filters are actually in factories all over North America in multiple industries outside of paint making. But what the filtration system does is it captures tiny microscopic particles of pigment. Anytime one of our factory workers who, when they're working, they're in an enclosed space and they have very robust personal protection equipment, PPE, such as goggles, masks, gloves, because they're the ones scooping the dry particulate pigments from large pigment bags and mixing those together with linseed oil in large industrial equipment. And the dry particulate powder is harmful to breathe when it's in that raw state. So the filtration system is designed to capture any amount of trace pigment each scoop, each time they put it in the bucket, there's always a small amount that's naked to the human eye, just in all of the space. So the filtration system is what cleans and purifies the air, captures the pigment dust, and makes it so the entire team at Gamblin is safe while they're working 5 days a week,
I
to make
love
all
that.
the colors. And then once a year, the filter has to be cleaned. And this tradition for Torrid Gray paint started in the early 2000s, crazy enough, when Robert Gamblin saw with his own eyes how much pigment was being pulled out of the filter annually and just being put into the landfill.
No, and pigment's expensive, so I'm sure he's doing the math on top of it all.
Exactly. But one of the beautiful things about Torrid Gray is how really it's deeply rooted in the joys of recycling and encouraging artists to recycle. So when we make Torrid Gray and we take all the pigment that's from the filtration system and remix it with oil, we always give it away as a free promotional sample, actually. Yeah, I know. It's like, well, it'd be really hard and really not right for us to sell it for money. One, there wouldn't be enough availability for it to be year round. There's just not enough. The uniqueness in which the color is made does not afford for it to be available at all times. So usually there's only a period once a year where we send what we make. What we get is what we make for a yearly batch, and we send it as a free sample to our retail partners who can do with it what they want and give it away. But that's the key, is that it's always a free sample that encourages people on the aspects of recycling in their oil painting studio.
Yeah, I love that. And what a great way to sort of encapsulate y'all's mission. And it's just like, especially when it's in your action and not just a mission statement on your website.
Exactly.
It's so amazing.
Yeah.
I'm curious because I know someone's wondering it right now. Do you know what time of year that usually goes on?
Oh, good question. Currently, we typically have been releasing it in the fall the last 2-3 years, in line with a lot of fall back to school promotional periods. So for anyone out there really wanting to get their hands on it, they usually ship out anywhere in the ballpark of late August and then available early September. Here's the thing, though, is that we don't, since Torrid Gray is so unique, there's a limited availability. And as much as we would like to, we don't have the ability to automatically send every single Gamblin retail partner a box of Torrid. There wouldn't be enough. So retailers really have to opt in, and we do communicate this with them in our own channels, how, we need to know if they'd like a box. And something artists can also do if they've been having trouble getting hands on a tube of Torrid Gray is they really should talk to their retailer about it. Their retailer might not be aware or might not know that they should be, that there's an interest in this. So that's one of the best things that an artist can do if they're wanting to make sure their retailer participates in the Torrid Gray promotion, is they should talk to the retailer.
Yeah, buddy up to your local art shop owner.
It's the best way. Best way for you to get a deal too. You never know what you might find.
I love that. Oh, that's so great. Thank you for sharing that. I know someone is like writing that down in their notes and they want to get a hold of it. But the next thing I want to kind of jump back to a little bit is talking more about solvent-free, using oil as a cleanser. One thing I want to start out by saying is, weirdly, whenever I was like researching it, it seems, and maybe I'm just like projecting and making it up, but like sometimes like the threshold at which you're solvent-free and not, there's a lot of focus on that. But whenever I started switching over to using no solvent, I sort of did it in steps. So like what you were saying with the oil, and I actually want to get into the oils too, because there's a lot to say about it. But I started by just in one sitting, in one painting session, I would use the oil to clean. And then at the end of the session, I would just go ahead and use my solvent because I had a bunch left to use up. And then eventually I would do the whole cleaning more or less with the oil. And then at the end of like a week, I would go ahead and clean with the like my big brush clean for the week, I would use my solvent and I would go outside and paint with it. And I still kind of followed that model mostly. If I needed to, I definitely could switch over completely because I've learned about like oil or not. Yeah, olive oil soap. And I figured out all of that stuff. But for me, there's lots of different ways you can do it. So like, I don't want, because switching over to oil as your cleanser, it works. Because I mean, if you've ever cleansed your skin with oil, like oil binds and it's effective. But I had someone also say like one thing to be aware of when you cleanse with oil, and I've heard people say this about Gamsol and solvents too, but your paint brush will never not be dirty a little bit. You have to kind of be okay with that. So I started having my light brushes and my dark brushes, and that's like, I don't mind the effort in that, but it is kind of complicated. It can be a little bit more nuanced. And so, if you could tell us like kind of how people might get started painting with solvent-free. And then more specifically, I also kind of wanted to, this is going to sound like an ad, but I wanted to highlight Gamblin's safflower oil, because when you cleanse with oil, and you're going to speak to this much better than I do, there's some things to keep in mind. I heard someone one time recommend using mineral spirit as their cleanser. And then I also heard someone say, don't do that because that never, mineral oil, sorry, that never completely dries, and you don't want that in your paint at all. And then also some oils that are cheaper, yellow. So there's like kind of this Goldilocks scenario where you want it to be slow dry, but you don't want it to never dry. And so anyways, if you could tell us a little bit about the best kind of oil to use and some things to be aware of.
Oh, no, that's a great next topic. Stepping off of the brush cleaning discussion, what types of oils work best for cleaning? And we get this a lot, and we always, number one, our first recommendation is going to be the Gamblin safflower oil for complete non-solvent alternative. One of the things too that is specific about Gamblin safflower oil is that it functions not only as a cleanser and a cleaner for your brushes, but it also can be utilized as a painting medium itself. For artists who are looking to extend the flow and the viscosity and also slow the dry time of the painting itself, of the paint layers, safflower oil that we offer, it works. It's very versatile because it can be used both as a medium and as a cleaner as well at the end. And there's a specific reason for this that sets it apart from cooking oils.
I've heard people suggest that.
Yes. So we would really caution people to be careful if they want to use safflower oil from the grocery store versus safflower oil from Gamblin or another type of oil from an art supply company. A lot of people think they're the same thing, and in theory, yes, they technically are. But there are some nuances, that was perfect way to describe it. Nuances to the oil that we source. So when Gamblin is sourcing safflower oil as a raw material, we're usually getting it to us in large 55-gallon drums. And we're using it for multiple purposes in our factory. The safflower oil goes into our solvent-free mediums that we make, which are used with color. They also go into our brightest white oil colors themselves. We use that same safflower oil as the binder in Gamblin Radiant White. As an example, one of our most popular whites, our brightest, most non-yellowing white that we offer is bound in safflower oil. And it's the same safflower oil as when you pick up a bottle of just Gamblin safflower oil from your art supply retailer. Okay. There's a big difference between what we're sourcing for our oils compared to what is sitting on the shelf at your grocery store. And it actually is a specific level of iodine. Fun enough, iodine. Yeah, and it's really interesting how a lot of the things with oil painting, you can compare it to the periodic table of elements. Like there's a lot of cross.
That high school chemistry finally having it to use.
Exactly. So There is a proper amount of iodine present in Gamblin safflower oil, in our linseed oil, and this is what you'll find from any type of oil you get from a reputable art supply company. Most likely the oil has been tested and sourced for a very specific level of iodine. And that, the iodine, is what ensures that the oil paint film properly oxidizes and dries. So when we're looking at a bottle of safflower oil at the grocery store,
Right.
nobody cares if that's going to dry or not, because what is it intended for? Cooking and ingestion, which, you know, it has its own, I'm sure, specifications when it's sourced, but the level of iodine is not a concern. So this means if an artist is using grocery store oils, you know, it can technically work very well as a brush cleaner, but we would really caution artists to be careful that the excess oil is not, if left in your brush, there could be some dangers if that is later mixed into your paints. The resulting painting may not dry. It is the worst possible outcome. And we've seen this not only with food grade oils when, you know, inadvertently used with their colors, but also with mineral oils as well, which have great purposes. Clove oil is a great example, and it's really popular too. Clove oil, an essential oil, is very, like, some people use it for all sorts of practices, but you would want to be very careful to not have it mixed directly into your paint, as it will really retard any type of oxidation and prevent your painting from drying. What I found clove oil is great for is if you have one of those wet seal palette boxes,
Right.
The airtight lid, and you want to keep, like, say you've got a really great palette of colors, you want to save them, you don't want to remix any like special flesh tones or mixtures that you just nailed and you want to save it. Well, one thing you can do is if you get one of those seal boxes, you can place your palette in it. And what I've done is taken a cotton ball and wet it with clove oil. And what I do is I just stick it in a corner of the box, far away from the paint.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And what happens is as the clove oil is evaporating into the box, it's replacing any oxygen, and your palette can stay wet for a long
That's so smart. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, I
with the
love that. And it'll
oil.
smell good. It'll smell like fall.
does.
Year round.
Yeah, it does actually. It smells wonderful. Like me, I like smelly things, but not everybody does. Like the spike.
Clove is a little less headache inducing than lavender can be. I mean, maybe that's personal, but I love clove.
But that is one of the great uses of like an essential oil like clove. But we would really caution people from using clove oil, essential oils, cooking oils from your grocery store. Really caution you against that getting mixed into the resulting paint layer, as we have seen tragic situations where the painting either does not dry, or it may dry in a short term, but one thing we have seen with cooking grade safflower oil is later on the oil would it's called weeping, where the oil, even after the painting's been dried for an extended amount of time, oil begins to weep like tears out of the paint. And
you want to make an emotional painting, but not that kind of an emotional.
Often it's an unintentional thing where it's really hard to say, oh, this was intentional.
An effect,
And a lot of that too is due to how cooking oils are not as refined is another reason. Like you mentioned at the start of this question, oils that come from an art supply company like Gamblin, like our refined linseed oil or Gamblin safflower oil, not only does the oil have a specific level of iodine to ensure drying, it also is more refined, meaning it has impurities taken out of it that can cause yellowing or other types of structure problems or long-term things like weeping of the paint. Like that's many careful steps along the way have been taken to ensure that the oil is stable, has the least amount of yellowing potential, and also works really well in terms of the flexibility and strength of the paint film too. The oil adds flexibility that helps prevent cracking because the paint film will move if there's any movement of the canvas or linen. So lots of benefits to, sourcing a high quality oil from an art supply company rather than getting something from the grocery store. You just never know what might happen if you were to go that route.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, and the thing is, I think a lot of people might be tempted to go that route to save some money. And so, I wonder if you could speak to what I do with my oil is kind of what you were saying with the Gamsol, where you let it settle and you can kind of reuse it. I will say it takes on, for me anyways, a reddish tint. And so, like I said earlier, with having dark brushes and light brushes, that oil gets demoted to light or dark brushes, and I have to kind of preserve. So I have like a system, all of this is just, I think for a lot of people, there's not one right way to paint solvent-free or low tox.
Right.
It's kind of custom. But, I'm always trying to not waste and be, for the environmental reason, but also for the money reason. So, that's kind of what I do. But like, do you have any good tips on like some, how to preserve that precious safflower oil, and then like some, less expensive ways to clean and maintain your brush if you wanted to switch to an oil cleansing method?
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's the one thing about the safflower oil that it does not compare to with Gamsol is it does not clarify. You can't recycle it, sadly. Usually you can maybe get one or two uses out of it before it is just dirty and has to be disposed of. So there is just that reality with the oil is that it can't be recycled in the same way. In fact, this does bring up an important safety concern in terms of the rags that might be generated when one is using that method. You do generate a lot more oil-soaked rags or paper towels. And what we do always try to mention to folks is how excess amounts of oily rags can be a fire hazard, actually. Namely, if you are balling them up into big piles and throwing them in the corner where you're not going to think about them, don't do that. The thing about oxidation of oil is that it creates a very small amount of exothermic energy when oxidation is happening and oxygen is being pulled in. There's a very small amount of energy and heat produced. And yeah, I know.
That's more that chemistry. It's all kind of like, yeah.
And when that is happening on your canvas or your panel, or even if you just leave a palette of colors out overnight, that isn't harmful. It's just oxidizing. It's doing its thing. But when you have a pile of rags or paper towels and they are just covered in oil and paint and soaked, really, there is danger because the bulky fibers of the rag pile itself can be a fire hazard. And if you have it's similar to a compost pile for anyone familiar with composting in their yard. Occasionally it's good to agitate and remix the compost pile because the center of the pile,
it's hot.
Hot, and it's exothermic energy as the pile is breaking down. It's a very similar concept to a pile of oil-soaked rags. If you get enough of them together, there's enough energy and heat that the very center of the pile can get hot enough to smolder, ignite, and cause a fire. And there's really easy ways to navigate this. Most individual painters, like just working on their own, don't generate enough rags for that to happen. Like if you're just making one or two dirty rags, a really easy solution is to just lay them flat on your table, lay them flat on a floor, or you can hang them as well, like on a little clothing line, and hung out or laid out individually to dry just on their own. They do not pose a threat of spontaneously combusting. It's only when you have a big, messy, big old pile
Out of them. Yeah.
and it is when that's a thing. So if you're just, common sense, very mindful about safely laying them out to dry, it won't be a problem. We found it's more in classroom environments and shared studios where a higher number of painters are all working together. That's when you can invest in the oily rag bins, which people may be familiar. If you've ever been to an oil painting classroom, usually they have a galvanized steel lid and a neat little foot lever for you to pop it open and shut when you throw your rag in. The purpose is that the airtight lid prevents any oxygen from
Right.
So in the presence of a fire, it is snuffed out and the fire will not spread. Other things you can do are taking excess rags and submerging them in water as well will prevent them from spontaneously combusting. But that is something we often, for artists that are new to the concept of using oils as opposed to solvents like Gamsol for their brush cleaning, this is often a new concept for them. And it's also often a new concept for people who are just entering the world of oil painting. It's really one of the only real safety hazards that I try to emphasize is the safe disposal and handling of oil-soaked rags is really one of the main things, I think, in a health and safety aspect. Because if you lay them individually to dry, a week or two goes on, you touch the rag, no more colors coming off, it's completely dry. At that point, the rag can be rewashed. Sometimes people might actually scrub out the paint and use the rag. Or it at that point could be safely disposed of in your household or studio garbage, whatever your preference is. I think I addressed part of your question there. In terms of the brush cleaning aspect. One thing I also mentioned to artists too, like you mentioned how it does dirty the brushes a bit. You always have a little bit of excess oil in there. A really good grease cutting dish soap or dish detergent can really help. Murphy's oil soap is great.
That's what a lot of people have suggested. And that's actually pretty inexpensive. A big one can last you years.
Forever. And that it does a really great job. If you really want to be eliminating, like you said, maybe you just clean with your safflower oil throughout the week, and then at the end of the week you do a deep clean to start the next week off fresh. That would be a great opportunity to use something like Murphy's oil soap or the Masters brush soap. It comes in a big tub. That tub will last years, trust me. Even if you paint all the time. You can get specialty brush soaps like the Masters product, which do a wonderful job of conditioning the brushes as well. The company Trikel offers some fabulous brush restoring products and conditioning products, specialty products for brushes. If you're spending a lot of money on your brushes and you want them to be tip-top shape, Trikel has some phenomenal products for rejuvenating them. But Murphy's oil soap works really well as in addition to all of that and is super inexpensive.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, I always give the analogy with my students when it comes to like cleaning brushes. And this always resonates with, the people with long hair. You take care of your brushes kind of the same way you take care of your hair, where like there's a line between you want it clean thoroughly, you want the oil and dirt removed, but you also don't want it so dry or like so hot that where it connects to the brush, it's that same fine that I often tell my students. But that's where oil cleansing kind of comes in. If you think about, I cleanse my face with oil, or, I've done oil treatments on my hair, then it kind of starts to click to people. Because I know the first time I heard about cleaning with oil, it kind of threw me off. But, you do eventually acclimate to it. And I think if you're concerned about the risk of solvent, you just want to be abundantly safe. There's a bit of a learning curve, but you do kind of adjust. And luckily, like you said at the very beginning, like a lot more people have interest in this, and there's a lot of info out there. One thing that truly I think made it possible for me was the the Gamblin solvent free. This is like, I fell in love with Galkid. Galkid for me was like the reason I could switch to oil. It was like, because I actually like quicker dry time. I love to be able to work on something and then the next day have it be mostly dry or like dry to touch. That's my favorite. And so for me, oil was tough. And then especially once I fell in love with Galkid and then I wanted to go completely solvent free. But this has been an amazing, if it was just oil, it would have been tough. So there's lots of like products out there, I think it's important as, a painter to be like, well, do you want fast dry time, slow dry time? What level of toxicity are you okay with? Like, can you use solvents outside, but you can only do that once a week? Like just knowing all of those things instead of having to think I have to change everything I do overnight so that I can be, oil or solvent free. It's more of like for me, it's been gradual. And I think that's been the key. And like, researching and finding products that'll support my needs instead of just committing to someone else's process overnight,
That could be so overwhelming if you totally turn everything upside down.
Yes.
Overnight. That's impractical. So you can slowly implement a lot of these things over time. Like you mentioned earlier, while you're painting, during the session, using oil instead of solvent, while you're painting, and then maybe using solvent at the end. That's a great one. And then Galkid is another great example for artists that are switching or making the transition from acrylic to oil. The dry time aspect is often
fantastic.
The biggest learning challenge is moving to a slower dry time, and Galkid saves the day. But Galkid is made with Gamsol. There's no getting around that. It's part of what helps it dry quicker, actually, since evaporation is much faster than purely Galkid really is wonderful, especially for artists who are wanting to do their underpainting practice, have that be very dry within a short period of time. And then you can also consider layering on top solvent free. And just because you start your painting with a medium like Galkid that contains solvent does not mean you have to keep using solvent. In fact, quite the opposite. It works even better for the aspect of the fatty painting, which could be a whole nother episode for us.
Yeah.
It actually works better to start with solvent and then switch to solvent free in the upper layers is a really practical way of layering your painting in a way that is archival and resistant to cracking. You also mentioned too, working outside is always a great alternative. For someone who can't get the right ventilation, you could work outside for your fluid washes and underpainting, and then work solvent-free indoors. As many people probably know, over in Oregon, California, the whole West Coast, we've been really plagued with wildfires on a much more frequent basis in the last few years. So me personally, I found long stretches through August, even into September, which is often peak fire season, where there's just no way I'm going to be able to work outside or even open a window in my home because of the hazardous air pollution from nearby wildfires. And let me tell you, that solvent-free gel really saves the day because it's not as fast drying as Galkid by comparison, but it does help speed along the dry time of the paint than if you were just using pure paint on its own or linseed or safflower oil. What's so special about that solvent-free gel and the solvent-free fluid, they are technically similar to the Galkid mediums in that they have a shared ingredient, alkyd resin. Sometimes folks hear the term alkyd resin and they think it's some type of a plastic or synthetic, but really the type of alkyd that is used for contemporary oil painting materials is made from a natural soybean oil.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so it's soy oil. It's just like any other type of oil. It's just derived from heat polymerized soybean oils are what make alkyd resins that are used in products like Galkid, Liquin by Winsor and Newton, and then our solvent-free mediums as well. The alkyd itself is solvent-free. With the case with Galkid, In Galkid Light, we take the alkyd resin and we mix it with Gamsol.
Right.
And in Galkid Light, it has a little bit extra Gamsol.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, with the case in those solvent-free mediums, there is no Gamsol in the equation at all. In place of Gamsol or any type of solvent, safflower oil, the same exact safflower oil,
Yes.
is used as the solvent component with the alkyd, with the soybean alkyd resin. So it really is a marvelous medium, in my opinion, because it does help speed along the dry time and the oxidation of paint, not as quickly as Galkyd does by comparison, but it does really help in terms of the layers setting up more quickly.
Yeah, I would describe it as, where Galkyd gets dried to the touch overnight and you can kind of work on top of it. It has that nice resin feel. This, it's a little different in texture to work with minorly, but I mention it because artists are very sensitive to that kind of thing.
So specific. Yes.
Very. It's slightly gummier, but I will say the finish, like the glossiness, almost identical to Galkyd. And then you might need about a day and a half to 2 days. I'm in Texas, so it's hot and dry here most of the year.
Yeah.
But
3 days longer is a perfect comparison. That's about the same in our comparative testing here in the Pacific Northwest, where we got a little bit more humidity and sometimes a lot more humidity during the winter time. If Galkyd is drying within a period of 24 to 48 hours in thin layers, that's key. The thicker you paint, the longer things will take to dry. If Galkyd is drying within 24 to 48 hours in that ballpark, you could expect the solvent-free fluid or the solvent-free gel to be maybe 3 days slower by comparison. So not crazy. If you were using just traditional linseed oil, you're looking at like a week to a week and a half.
I can't do that. I lose interest in the painting at that point.
Exactly. And so they do. That was the intention with the solvent-free mediums when we released them to the market in 2013. Crazy enough, they are just hitting their decade anniversary on the market. And the intention when Gamblin brought them on was to really provide just more options for painters outside of using solvents. To your point, there are so many different avenues and ways of working that an artist can take advantage of to not just eliminate solvent, but just reduce your use of it. And depending on your practice or depending on your technique, certain combinations and methods may work great for different individuals. Something I do want to mention that we provide as a free service at Gamblin is we do give personal consultations to artists.
That's amazing.
It's at the heart of one of our missions has always been to be an accessible resource for artists, and our artists are also always welcome. You can schedule time over the phone or even a Zoom call if you want a one-on-one consultation to ask any and all questions. And I always encourage that for people who have like really specific needs. Maybe they have a special project they want to troubleshoot. Maybe they're moving into a new space that has a different setup from what they're used to working with, or maybe they're just switching things up. We really encourage people to contact us whenever they want to just discuss these things and get on a really personal level for their individual needs. Right. People are always welcome to get in touch with us for those types of things.
I love that. That's so helpful. That's so amazing, because I know I field a lot of questions for my students, and you can get really into the weeds where it's like, it's just,
oh my gosh. Yeah. And I always caution people too about forums and things like that, because, you can sometimes get a lot of very well-intentioned recommendations. And sometimes those recommendations can sometimes seem like, or phrased as the only way to do it or the right way to do it, when I'm always telling people there are a million ways to do this. And it really boils down to your intentions and your specifications and needs as an individual artist.
Yeah, well, and to even expand on that, like, everyone just has different goals. Like, someone may not really care if their work is archival and, they're painting on acid paper because 'cause they're trying to save a buck, and their whole goal is, like, "Let's just make good quality that's inexpensive." Well, your goal is archival, all of a sudden, you're not gonna meet up. So, yeah, that's something because I researched this for a long time, and people, I think, mean well, but everyone's goals of what they want out of their painting is different, and so
Different, yeah.
it factors into it. So the last question I have before I let you go, I could talk to you forever, and I may schedule another appointment just for myself
We
one day, but,
should. I think we should have a second episode.
oh my gosh, I totally. I'm sure people will have questions and we can just round those up and chat again. But I wanted to leave by talking about varnishing, and maybe you could walk us through, is there solvent in a varnish? Like if someone wants to have how do they approach that in a safe way, going forward? Because it's the last step of your painting. Is there a way to do that safely? What are your thoughts?
Yes, yes. Well, I will issue a huge disclaimer that varnishing could very easily be its own hour and a half episode. Very, very easily. But we can address those specific questions. So there isn't any varnishes that are solvent free in the Gamblin line, especially. Our Gamvar picture varnish is made with Gamsol. And if ventilation is a problem, then artists need to be mindful of that when they're applying Gamvar, is that they have open containers with Gamsol in them, and that Gamsol is going to be physically evaporating off of their painting while the varnish dries. And that takes a period of about 18 to 24 hours maximum is the longest it would take for the varnish to dry. If anyone out there would just like to know, like, how long is the Gamsol evaporating off of my painting while the varnish is drying. In dry, arid climates with low humidity, it could be dry within 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah, I've had it dry almost feels just like that amount of time period down here in the middle of
within
summer.
just a couple hours. And that means when the varnish is dry, that means all the Gamsol is evaporated away and is gone. So your environment can play a huge role in that. In more humid climates, it can take longer, upwards of 18 to 24 hours for the Gamsol to have evaporated out of the varnish layer. So these are important things. Some artists varnish outdoors too, if ventilation is a concern. One of the things about Gamsol, since it has most of the harmful aromatics removed, it's also has a very low dissolving strength in terms of the dissolving capabilities. It's very weak. Like we said, how it can't formulate natural resins like Damar. The weak dissolving strength of Gamsol is another component to why oil painters don't need to wait 6 months to a year before applying a varnish like Gamvar to their artwork. That is the case with Damar resin varnishes that are formulated with turpentine, most commonly. The turpentine is so strong, you really need to wait an extended period of time before you can safely apply the varnish. What really enables artists to varnish their paintings sooner with a product like Gamvar is due to how the Gamsol is so weak. It usually, if you have a painting, especially if you're using faster drying mediums like the Gal Kit or the solvent-free gel, and you have thin layers, you're probably looking at somewhere around 2, maybe 3 weeks, for the paint film to be dry to the touch, tack-free, and ready for a layer of Gamvar. Paintings with heavy texture may require a month or longer. The main benefit to varnish, there's always the immediate result that you see on social media. The pop, the everything gets unified and the colors just become deeper and more saturated.
So nice.
And it's often that beautiful moment that is an added benefit, how varnishing can unify the overall surface quality. But the actual long-term benefit is that the varnish protects your artwork over time from any buildup of dust, dirt, grime, stains. It offers decades of protection. So many artists wonder, do I have to varnish
Mm-hmm.
The answer is no. It's technically an optional step. Anyone who's saying it's required,
Interesting.
that's not the case. Varnishing is technically a matter of personal preference. We would comment how unvarnished paintings are more susceptible to damage in the long term, especially if any cleaning or restoration is performed on your artwork later down the road. That's a process where dust and grime is removed. If there's a varnish like Gamvar, that just is easily taken off.
Right.
It's just simply taken off. If there is no varnish, that means the dust has embedded into the layers of your painting. So any type of cleaning or restoration can be a bit more difficult.
Right.
So those are the things artists can keep in mind when they're deciding, should I varnish? Should I not varnish? We could easily do a whole episode 2 on varnishing. So for anyone out there that has unanswered questions on the topic of varnishing, we do dedicate a large amount of real estate on our website to the topic of Gamvar. So gamblincolors.com. Look up the multiple FAQ pages, video demonstrations on the topic of varnishing, and you're also always welcome to connect up with us one-on-one if you have really specific questions. And same goes for many of the aspects we talked about in terms of studio safety, use of solvents, disposal of oily rags, and other health and safety topics. The studio safety section of our website
it's very robust.
Phenomenal resources. So anyone who hasn't had the opportunity, do check that out. And if there's ever a question on there that the website doesn't answer, just know that you're very welcome to get in direct contact with us to help.
Fantastic. I'm going to include all of that in the show notes, and I'm going to include definitely the link to the solvent free line. I really think that that's what helped me make the switch, is like having that dedicated section. Before you go though, I had one kind of thing that popped in my head about the varnish. It's a suggestion that I want to give, but I want to float it past you. So what I do is I have a covered patio, but I take my varnished paintings and I put a cardboard box on top of it so there's no dust on it. And I just let them sit outside. Like I'll do it in the morning and I'll come check on them right before I go to bed. And they're usually fine. And at that point, I'll move them inside and they're hardly off gassing at all.
Oh, that's perfect. That is perfect.
Okay.
That is great, especially to manage dust settling on the painting as the varnish dries. That is a huge dilemma that artists are faced with. I would say in your climate, that probably works really well. But for anyone in a more humid climate, you're going to want to make sure that you poke some holes in the side of the box to help with airflow.
That's a good idea.
In your environment, it might not be, if it's really dry, that might not be a problem. But for humid environments, if you completely enclose it in a box, the humidity may cause the varnish to remain tacky for a long time. So poking some holes on the side of the box, not the top of the box. That's how you get in, but on the side, even a couple holes can make a huge difference. Or what I've done too is taken a piece of foam core or cardboard, and you can use any old object, like I've used tuna fish cans on all four corners of the painting to make like little legs of a table on each four. And then I'll float a piece of cardboard or foam core over it to prevent dust from settling on the painting as it dries. And then if you allow just an inch or two of airflow so that the painting can dry. It really depends on your environment though. I would say if you're in a really humid environment, that's when you got to be more careful about the airflow aspect. Otherwise, the varnish can remain really sticky and tacky.
Right. Yeah. Something I thankfully don't have to contend with too much, but I'm so glad you included that. Well, I really appreciate how generous you are with your time. And I know that people will have more questions, but I think this is such a great starting point. I know that this is what I would have needed years ago when I was starting my solvent-free journey. So I just wanted to thank you again for all of your fantastic insights. I'm going to leave, link to your information, link to Gamblin. Again, it is a really robust website. Like I know when I was on my journey, flipping through that was so helpful. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your time with me.
It was my pleasure, really my pleasure. And we should definitely do this again. I think if people have another topic they'd like to discuss, I'm always available and happy to do that. Like I said, if we can reach as many people as possible, that's wonderful. So do stay in touch. Yeah, and it's been my pleasure.
Yes, thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and gained a lot of insight from it. I know I certainly did after the interview. As always, you can reach out to Mary Tevlin. I'll put her information in the show notes. Also, feel free to reach out to me with questions. I want to say I've been really open about my solvent-free painting journey on and off with my Instagram account, and you guys have not only provided me with lots of great insights, but y'all's questions also sort of informed this journey I've been on. So as always, feel free to leave me questions. It's more helpful than you know. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Happy creating, y'all. Oh, and also, one thing that always helps channels out is to leave reviews. Let us know how you're doing. I always appreciate when you guys contact me, whether it's a private email or message, or of course, a review on Spotify or Apple. So if you could take the time to do that, I would greatly appreciate it. And I'll read off your handle or name on next week's episode. Thanks again. Happy creating.